Hello everyone and welcome to another video here on the 10th YouTube channel. My name is Jonathan and I'm joined by Tyler, and today we are going to be going over the kit of a battalion soldier in His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot recreated. I portray a sergeant, Tyler portrays a corporal, but today we're just going to be going over the corporal kit. To give you a little idea of what a battalion company is, they're just the standard soldiers of the 18th century British Army. They're the most numerous and common soldiers in the army. There are 8 companies of them, and then one of light infantry and one of grenadiers. But these are the most numerous soldiers who do the regular duties, and when those 2 flank companies need men, they'll take them from these center companies. Now we portray Colonel Sanford's company, actually General Sanford's company, and we have him here on the table. He is the colonel, general, and captain of the most senior battalion company in the regiment. And here he is in the early 1770s, and at our time in 1775, he would have been a lieutenant general. Without any further ado, why don't we get started at looking over the kit. The producer of this video would like us to start from the bottom and work our way up, so that's where we will begin. So let's get started with the shoes. Shoes in this period are a fairly standard and common affair. They're made out of leather and they are straight-lasted, which means there's no right and there is no left. And in this period, you put the shoes on, and when you wear them, they kind of mold to your feet, creating a left and a right shoe. And those shoes are then closed with buckles, and those buckles just are like a regular buckle where you put the tongue through and you tighten it up and it keeps your shoe on. A little bit different than laces, but a similar concept of keeping your shoe tight. As we move on, we then have stockings which go into your shoe and on your leg and to your thigh. They're a little bit longer than your stocks today, but they're a similar concept that are made out of wool. And historically, they would then have a seam in the back. These ones just happen to be one of my tired pairs, since Tyler is currently wearing a good pair. But I pulled these out so you can at least get an idea of what stockings look like. And then if we move on, over those stockings, right now Tyler is wearing his winter leggings. Winter leggings are winter wear for a soldier who is, say, on a guard post and needs to keep warm. So they're for that duty only. By this point in history, the tall gaiter has gone out of fashion, and you don't see it by this point. Short gaiters, which we have here, are the norm. These are only for that winter wear. So over top of his winter leggings are something called garters, and they affix through this little tiny brass buckle. When he's wearing the winter leggings, they go over the top, but when he's wearing his regular uniform of the breeches with the stockings, those just then go at the bottom of his breeches. Now, to give you an idea of what would normally be worn for service are these short gaiters that we see here, and they would be made out of a linen canvas that is then blackballed. Today, we don't blackball them because blackball is a fairly hard thing to get right if you don't have the right tallow, so it can just get everywhere. So a lot of people opt for this kind of concession. It's one of the few things that we really do make a concession for in reenacting, is treating our gaiters with black paint and shoe polish as opposed to the black ball. So as we move up from there, we then get the woolen breeches. And these are the standard breeches of a soldier in this period. He gets 1 pair a year, and he has to make it last. So he better be good to his clothing, and soldiers in this period are expected to take good care of their clothing. Breeches are constructed a little bit differently than modern pants, and they tend to splay more, and they also fit tight. And that's something that's important to think about when we look at an 18th soldier's kit, is that, well, his kit is very fit and trim, and that is the style, that elegant, dance-like nature of the 18th century, which we'll see more as we go up Tyler's uniform here. Now, the next thing up is Tyler's waistcoat, and that is made out of wool broadcloth, much like the breeches, and it is buttoned up the front and is lined with a coarse linen. In this case, Tyler's is lined in just a kind of shirting weight linen, and then his initials are actually embroidered in the back, so that way he knows that it's his waistcoat, and the same will be done in all the other garments. Military writers like Cuthbertson talk about the name of the soldier and of the tailor to be put into the garments. That way they know whose garment it is, and then when the tailor buggers the job, you can go and find him, as tailors are well known in this period for sometimes getting a little more intoxicated than they really should. Now, on top of that waistcoat is Tyler's coat. This is probably the most iconic piece of kit for a British regular. It is his coat that is worn at all times when he is on duty. Sometimes off duty they would have last year's coat that they have cut down into a fatigue jacket, but for all service-related things, this is his main garment. And if you take a close look at the coat, you can see that it has yellow lapels that signify that he's part of the 10th, as this is the 10th's color, bright yellow. Yellow being actually the most common color of facings in the British Army at this point in history. And then if you take an even closer look, you can see that Tyler has these lace loops on his coat with a blue line. And those signify, again, that he's the 10th Regiment. And then if you zoom in even closer, you can see a button on that lace loop that has a 10th button. This coat is primarily made out of wool. The outer part of the coat is made out of a madder red, which would have historically been dyed from a madder root. Then he has the yellow, which we discussed just a little bit ago, and that tends to be things like marigold and onion skins. We don't actually know what ours was dyed with, but that gives you an idea of the kinds of things that they would have been dyed with historically. The lace itself, it is also made out of wool. It is a worsted wool, which means it's made from very long, clean, thin strands. And then the button is just a standard pewter button. Historically, they would have been made with lead. These are lead-free buttons. So that's his coat. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that Tyler has a shoulder strap on one side, but on the other side, he has an epaulette. And this is what denotes him as being a corporal. Normally, on a regular private soldier, this would just be plain. But as Tyler is a corporal and he holds a rank, this is what signifies that he is a corporal. It is the only distinction aside from him holding the rank. That's what shows you is the epaulette. Now, moving up, or I really should say inside, is that we have his shirt popping through the coat here. And it is just a standard linen shirt, which is what shirts in this period were made out of. And on it, though, is a little bit of a ruffle that comes out of the shirt. It's a common misconception that ruffles are only for officers and gentried people. Because he is a proper British soldier, he is supposed to look like a gentleman and he's supposed to look elegant. So accordingly, the prevalent style in this period is to have a shirt ruffle that is popping out of the waistcoat and then accordingly through his coat. Now, it doesn't call for it in the warrant, but in almost every depiction of a British soldier in the 1770s and 1780s, a ruffle is popping out of the shirt. There are only a couple of images of soldiers that don't have them. This is a very common feature, and we also have some written accounts of regiments then having them as well. So just a little cool factoid of the period. One thing, unfortunately, you can't see here because Tyler's wearing his full uniform is that the shirt then affixes here with something called sleeve buttons. It is essentially just the modern equivalent of cufflinks. Now, if we move on to the upper part of his shirt, we see that he has a neck stock. And neck stocks are horsehair that then have a linen backing with a brass clasp in the back. And there's not much to say about it, but it's kind of like our modern equivalent of a tie. It keeps him nice, prim and proper, and creates a nice line between his body and his head. So next up, we have his hat. And his hat is a black wool hat with a white worsted tape binding with bands and tassels, also made out of wool and white tape and these little pom-poms on the side, which are tassels. And then in the front, we have a horsehair cockade with another piece of worsted tape that holds that cockade in place. Now, hats in the 1700s would, of course, change depending on decade, and this hat is blocked according to the predominant style of the 1770s. And that is this, what you see here, with a fairly high front within a large fan in the back. Just prior to this, you would have hats that are more equilateral in the sense of they're a point, a point, a point. Now, if we move on to Tyler's accoutrements, we see that on the front, we have this 2 3/4 inch buff shoulder belt. And that then attaches to Tyler's cartridge pouch. Now, if Tyler gives us a right about face, we can see his pouch here. And this is where a soldier would hold his ammunition. And this particular model of cartridge pouch holds 29 rounds of 69 caliber ball with a powder charge. Now, the powder charge in this period could vary quite a bit, but we don't need to go into that in this video. What you need to know is that it holds 29 rounds, and this is for the soldier's ready-use ammunition. And then sometimes soldiers could even hold other cartridges in the bottom of it in some sort of tin tray, but every pouch could vary quite a bit depending upon your regiment, as this is something that is purchased by the colonel of the regiment. It is not the usual stand of arms. This gives you an idea of where a soldier would hold his ammunition. Now, if you take a look on the 10th channel, there is actually a video on the cartridge pouch, which you can take a look at somewhere on the shorts of this channel. Now, if Tyler gives us a right about face, we can then take a look at his bayonet belt. In this case, and in this period of time, it would be a waist belt, and it is 2 inches wide, and it is affixed with this brass plate here that has a 10 on it. And that then attaches to this frog, which holds the soldier's bayonet. And then that goes on top of Tyler's 1769 Shortland pattern musket. Now, actually for this impression, it is not accurate, as we most likely should have a Longland pattern musket, but those are not really something that are commercially viable these days. The Pedersoli 1769 is the easiest musket to obtain that is affordable. But the only difference, well, I should say real difference between this musket and the 1756 is that this musket is 4 inches shorter. So you can imagine that it would come to about here, about Tyler's chin. The musket then has a few cool engravings on it. Here on the thumb plate, we have Tyler's musket rack number and the company which Tyler is a part of. 1 being the Colonel's company, in this case the General's company, as we are the 10th Regiment of Foot under General Sanford here. That then denotes his musket as his musket in his company. Now, we'll have Tyler unfix his bayonet, and while he's doing that, we will go through some of the other bits of kit that Tyler would carry when he's not on regular garrison service. And that's what this kit is here, just his regular garrison uniform. This is not for him going out on an expedition or anything like that. This is just, if he's just say doing duty in Boston, this is how Tyler would be dressed. Now, in certain instances, there are things that we could now add to Tyler's kit to make Tyler a little bit more prepared for certain conditions. Say you're going on an expedition. Well, what are some things you might need on an expedition that, say, is a day? Well, one thing is that Tyler's going to need to eat something. So here we have a haversack. And this is just an Osnaburg linen bag that holds Tyler's food. It is roughly square and has this linen then strap on top. And on the back we have this Georgius Rex broad arrow, which is just an inspection mark. It's not really anything fancy. Now, oftentimes in reenacting, you'll see people have it backwards for some reason, probably because they want to use this as like a Gucci symbol, but this is not a Gucci symbol. This is not for pride and joy in your regiment. This is, it's literally just an inspection mark. And by the turn of the century, this would turn into a BO for Board of Ordnance, and it would also have the broad arrow, but as we're not a Napoleonic unit, that really does not apply to us. So the haversack, what an interesting little food bag. Now, of course, could hold whatever the food might be on that day, but commonly the foods issued to soldiers were beef, peas, butter, but that's for an entirely different video. Now next, if Tyler is going on an expedition, he's going to need to drink something. And to do that, he needs his tin canteen, which this one is a quart canteen, so 32 ounces. It goes over him with this hemp rope. Now this is slightly wider than it needs to be, but it is actually really hard to find appropriate hemp rope that is narrow, and a lot of the modern canteens have loops that are too large. But this is a pretty good approximation of an 18th century soldier's canteens. Now, canteens would be replaced basically yearly because these canteens do not last very long. This one is actually stainless steel, so it will last a little bit longer, but you can scrub it down to make it look like tin, because tin just really rusts away. As the 10th is a fairly active unit, we've had a lot of canteens that have actually rusted through, even with prolific drying and whatnot. Now, you've seen Tyler's leggings for winter wear. Another thing for winter wear would be a soldier's mittens. The mittens just go on a soldier's hands. They're fairly close to a mitten you might see today. They are knit out of a fairly heavy weight wool. The big difference, though, between these mittens and mittens you might see your grandmother make today is that they don't have any ribbing here. They are just flat all the way to the cuff of the coat with a little bit of a garter stitch here. So mittens, they're not necessarily the greatest for holding a musket, but a soldier is not expected to really be fighting all that often. He's really doing monotonous work most of the time, and if he's standing guard, these work just fine. And if you do have to wear your mittens to fight, you deal with it because you're a soldier in the army. But those are the mittens, and they go along with winter leggings as part of the winter kit. Now, if Tyler's off duty, he's going to need something to put on his head because, as the military writer Cuthbertson says, he might want to preserve his hat when it's raining out. And that then comes in the forage cap. This is the cap that Tyler will wear when he's just doing regular, fatigue duty, which might include in Boston building works and fortifications. But this is just his off-duty cap. You can put the sides down here and you can put the flap out front like so. But it's a pretty neat little cap. So how these were produced, we don't know a lot about, but one kind of theory on it, or I should say hypothesis, is that they were just cut out of last year's coat, as we sometimes see that, but how different regiments historically did it, we can't necessarily be sure, as every regiment would have been different, but those are just some ways that forage caps could be obtained. But we do know in the military writer Cuthbertson that he says this should be used for preserving the soldier's regular cap, and that it should be made and constructed like this. And we have that then reflected in a lot of artwork where these caps show up in this configuration. Now, if a soldier needed to go out and carry more of his stuff, he would normally have a goatskin pack, but that really is more for being on long campaigns and transiting between different locations. But for something like Bunker Hill, where they're just ordered to go out with a blanket, well, how do you carry a blanket? Well, in this period, they don't tell us how to do that. There's just this order for them at Bunker Hill to go out. Our regiment was not part of that expedition. But how would a soldier do that? And that is most likely in a fashion like this. It's very almost Civil War looking, but we do see some artwork from the early 1770s of how to carry cloaks, and they're fashioned much like this, just tied up, and then they would be put around the shoulder. This would be the prevalent method probably in this period, but this was not a common thing for soldiers to go out with their blankets until the next year's campaign. But if they had to in 1775, this is most likely how that would be done. Our impression is, of course, 75, but if in the following year, if Tyler needed to go out, he would then put it together like this. And this is just rolled up with a tump line, which we start seeing orders for in 1776. So this is what Tyler may have looked like when he was serving in the New York campaign the following year. The blanket is just worn in a slightly more practical fashion. But that really covers the kit for Tyler from the pre-war era into about 1776 and into early 1777. We don't necessarily know too much about what the 10th may have been wearing in 1777, but this gives you a good idea of what Tyler would have looked like in the opening stages of the American War for Independence. Well, thank you all for watching this video on the kit of a battalion soldier in His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot in 1775. I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's been a little long-winded, but we appreciate you coming here and learning a little bit about our nation's history. Now, if you like this channel, give it a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content coming down the pipeline soon. And let's give a big thank you to our corporal here for modeling for us. And we'll see you all in the next video.